Welcome everybody to this online seminar on housing, and in particular tonight on social housing, on building community. This is a further one in a series of seminars that began in the Diocese of Gloucester and now being shared much more nationally around around the UK as we reflect on housing and as we bring together a whole range of people with different interests in housing and a commitment to better housing, all of which comes from Coming Home, the report commissioned by the Archbishops that promoted good housing which should be sustainable, safe, stable, sociable and satisfying. And that commitment to finding homes for all, houses which become homes and build community. And I think it's that unites us tonight, that commitment to housing and commitment to community. And we have some excellent speakers who are going to engage with us this evening. I'm really pleased, as always in these seminars, it won't just be people speaking to us, but there will be a chance a bit later on for us to meet together in groups and to reflect on what we have heard. And I'm really grateful to Chris Beals, who has been coordinating all of this and putting it together, and he's going to be listening, and he'll give us some questions that we'll give a chance to focus our thoughts in our discussion groups. And then at the towards the end of our time, we'll come back together, and I'll explain more of this later, but using the chat function, we will be able to have a conversation together in plenary. We're going to begin by someone who very sadly is not able to be here, but has recorded a message for us, which is Bishop Guli, the Bishop of Chelmsford, who I've had the privilege of working with for a number of years in various areas, and particularly in this area of housing. And Guli, who sits in the House of Lords and is engaged with national government, oversees the work of the Church Housing Foundation and all that has come out of the Coming Home report that I mentioned a while ago. She is Bishop of Chelmsford. Before that, she was Bishop of Loughborough. Has an extraordinary life story. She came to this country as a refugee following the Islamic Revolution in Iran, and she also speaks on refugee issues in the House of Lords, as well as this subject on housing, but recognizing that need for all people to have this good place to live and to belong. So it's really good that Guli is able to address us, and we look forward to what she has to say.
I'm very sorry that I can't be with you in person tonight due to a prior commitment that I wasn't able to change, but I'm delighted to record a few words to introduce this event on social housing, building community. I don't need to go over again in detail the appalling situations that make up the housing crisis. The number of people with insecure and unaffordable tenancies in the private rental sector, the shocking rise in households who are homeless, the severe shortage of temporary accommodation and the plight of those families who are stuck in hotel rooms, or the mounting pressures on homeowners and landlords whose mortgages are becoming unaffordable. Underlying the whole housing crisis is the acute shortage of affordable housing in Britain, which gets worse each year. Too few new homes are being built. Our planning system is underfunded, and there's a net loss of social homes due to right to buy and demolitions. This is one of the main concerns of the Coming Home report, which launched the Archbishop's Housing Initiative and created the role of a Bishop for Housing. The Diocese of Gloucester has generously funded this initiative over the last 2.5 years as we work out how to turn the vision of Coming Home into a movement for social reform in housing. We believe the Church of England can play a key role in 3 ways. By emphasising the urgent moral case that having a roof over your head is a basic human right for everyone, by mobilising our extensive networks of engaged volunteers across the country, and by rethinking the way we manage all our own land and properties. We're starting by establishing 3 new entities. The first is the Church Housing Foundation, the heartbeat of the movement, and if you like, the parent charity. Its job is promoting the vision and values of coming home, mobilising and supporting networks of people giving time to local housing initiatives, and providing financial support to get projects started at the local and parish level. Secondly, we're creating a church development agency to undertake housing development directly on church-owned land. Regionally based teams of professionals and community activists will bring capacity, confidence and competence to resource good property development. The profits generated will be used to build more social homes and to resource the parent charity. Thirdly, we're registering the Church Housing Association, which will enable the church to become a major owner of social rented houses. We want to help meet the huge need for truly affordable homes in ways that drive up quality based on the 5 core values in the Coming Home report. You'll all be familiar with them, I'm sure, that good housing should be sustainable, safe, stable, sociable and satisfying. When I reflect on the subtitle of this evening's event, The Role of the Church in the Future of Social Housing, I'm aware that housing associations and local authorities are facing a perfect storm. Inflationary costs, the need to decarbonise and improve energy efficiency, and the challenge of removing damp and mould all eat away at their reserves, limiting what they can put towards building desperately needed homes. But I'm dreaming of a better day for social housing, when planning reform reduces the land cost for social homes, when the government's Affordable Homes programme has sufficient funding and offers more generous grants, when the stigma around social housing in many places fades because of high build quality, good maintenance and well-planned mixed tenure developments, when new homes are built to zero carbon standards and maximise energy efficiency, and when people are proud to be living in social housing and contribute to creating thriving and cohesive neighbourhoods. The Church Housing Association will be part of this, and we are committed to building inclusive and supportive community relations as well as good quality physical buildings. A distinctive element of our housing association will be directly funding a community worker or neighbourhood chaplain wherever we own around 100 houses or more. They will help to strengthen community connections and support the tenants living there. As well as seeking to model good housing and community at the local level, we've sought to influence national housing legislation and policy. We're challenging the government's wholly inadequate definition of housing affordability, which is 80% of market prices, and we're calling for a realistic definition in relation to incomes. And from a policy perspective, we urgently need a long-term, cross-party national housing strategy. To that end, back in May, I formed a steering group in the House of Lords comprising Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem and crossbench peers, all with significant expertise and commitment to the housing sector. In partnership with the Nationwide Foundation, we then set up a broader round table of senior political and sector leaders to advise on developing a new national housing strategy for England. Around 20 highly experienced and thoughtful leaders met in early September to discuss the approach proposed by the research team, which is led by Professor Ken Gibb from the Collaborative Centre for Housing Evidence, or CASH. We're also working on getting high-level commitment to the strategy from the major political parties ahead of the general election, and ideally having it referenced in party manifestos. The strategy will focus on vision, values and outcomes rather than on short-term policy decisions, and will cover all the main types of tenure: home ownership, social housing, private rented homes. Crucially, it will include a plan for increasing the supply of truly affordable homes, especially for people in greatest need, And it'll set ambitious goals for improving the quality and sustainability of the housing stock, including decarbonisation targets for both new and existing homes. In some ways, creating a really good strategy is the easy part. Much more difficult is to convince all the main political parties to commit to this long-term framework so that subsequent governments, whether left or right, will adhere to it. It's been done before, of course, most notably through the Climate Change Committee and the commitment to achieving net zero by 2050. So let me conclude by reminding us that Britain's housing crisis is neither accidental nor inevitable. If we, as the Church, are willing to lead by example, and if we urge the government and other stakeholders in the housing sector to work within the parameters of a national housing strategy over an extended period of time, then we might succeed in creating homes and communities that are sustainable, safe, stable, sociable and satisfying for all, reflecting a hopeful Christian vision for human flourishing. Thank you very much for listening, and I wish you every blessing.
Really good to hear from Bishop Guli there. And I think that's laid down some really firm foundations for the beginning of our conversation tonight, both practically in reflecting on the values of the Coming Home report, in setting out some of the things that the church is seeking to do, and in sending out some provocations which may well fuel some of our conversation a bit later on this evening, of what will truly bring about that long-term change for which I suspect everybody, by your presence here, is seeking to bring about. So hold on to those things from Guli as our input goes through this evening, and then we'll bring that together in the conversations that we'll be having. I'm really pleased, following on from Bishop Guli, to be able to introduce Christine Hill. Christine works mainly in the northwest, Merseyside, Cheshire, Lancashire, Cumbria, but she does make the trip across the Pennines into the Tees of Valley. She has a history degree and a master's in civic design, which seems to me very appropriate for her work with Homes England now for the last 15 years, where she's a senior specialist in affordable housing delivery. And works with developers, housing associations, local authorities, and other partners to identify and deliver a regular supply of affordable housing schemes in the Northwest. And that includes affordable rent, shared ownership, social rent, supported housing. She's a key, the key link in Homes England for the church's work. She also loves to sing, a member of the Liverpool Philharmonic Choir, and is the proud guardian of a new border terrier, very young border terrier puppy as well, which says a lot about someone who comes to this very rounded. And Christine, we're delighted that you're here and really grateful for all you have to say.
Well, thank you very much, Bishop Robert. Hello, everybody, and thank you for asking me to speak at your conference today. If we could just move the slides on. I've been asked to share, obviously, my reflections. I'm billed as reflections on the future direction for social housing. So I'm going to do that by, first of all, just talking briefly about what Homes England is. Some of you may know what Homes England is. Some of you may have no idea, not encountered us. Just to talk briefly about the distinction between affordable housing and social housing, to talk about what Homes England's role in social housing is, and also what the future direction for social housing, as I've said, to offer a couple of perspectives from Homes England, from a Homes England angle. Okay, so if we could just have the next slide, please. So to begin with, what is Homes England? So we are the government's housing and regeneration agency. You may have come across us or heard of us in some of our previous incarnations. For those of you who've been around a long while, we were originally the Commission for New Towns. We then became English Partnerships, which was the organisation I joined 15 years ago. Many of you will probably be familiar with the Housing Corporation, which English Partnerships merged with in 2010 to become the Homes and Communities Agency. And we finally became Homes England in 2018. So if you've come across any of those organisations, and don't worry if you haven't, but if you have, that's kind of what Homes England is. We're an arm's length body. So we're not civil servants, we're public servants, but we are accountable to the Department for Levelling Up and the Secretary of State and the Housing Minister. So we report into government, and our job is to sort of deliver government housing policy. Since 2018, our primary role has been to support the development of new homes, both affordable and market-facing housing. And then more recently, earlier this year, we actually set out our stall for the next 5 years, our strategic plan, which you've got an image of there and a link to if anybody's interested in having a look at it, actually extends our role more broadly to think about places and to think about the regeneration of those places. And just to give you a couple of examples, the sorts of activity that we do, we're involved with development finance. So that's loans to local builders to build new homes. We're conscious that for many small and medium enterprise contractors and developers, it's very difficult for them to get funding. So we that's one function that we have. We also offer infrastructure loans to open up developments, often building roads, bridges, to open up housing sites. And we work with housing associations to get more affordable housing built. And we do that through our Affordable Homes programme, which I will come on to shortly. But again, just before I do that, I thought it worth reflecting briefly on what we mean by affordable housing and what we mean by social housing, because it can be a bit confusing. And I think kind of, I guess, the Coming Home report, which obviously many of you will be familiar with, references truly affordable housing. And by that, I take that to mean social housing. And that's because social housing is the form of housing provided by housing associations and local authorities, which is relatively often the most low cost for people who live in it. It's not necessarily always that case, but it's set according to a rent formula, which I'm absolutely not an expert on. It's set by the regulator of social housing, which is our sort of sister organisation. And those rents are usually set at between 30 and 50% of market rent. And they also have reference to local incomes as well. Affordable rent is a different type of affordable housing, comes under the umbrella of affordable housing. So there's social rent, there's affordable rent, and affordable rents are often set at up to 80% of market rent. Not always, often capped at local housing allowance. To make it as affordable as possible, but clearly can often be a lot more expensive. Although in some instances, social rent can be more expensive than affordable rent. It's quite rare that happens, but there are geographies where that is the case. We also fund social rent. We also fund shared ownership homes and rent to buy as well. That's that third bullet point, and I can talk more about that. And if anyone's got any questions on that, I'm more than happy to do that. But the focus of this session is on social rent. So all of those 4 tenures that I've just talked about, social rent, affordable rent, rent to buy, and shared ownership, all sit under that umbrella of affordable housing, and they're all needed in different locations and for different reasons. Okay, so we just move to the next slide. So what is Homes England's role in social housing? So we have the Affordable Housing Programme, which is quite a chunky pot of funding. It's £11.5 billion worth of funding over 5 years, from 2021 to 2026. And through that pot of funding, we support, or we're tasked with delivering up to 180,000 affordable homes. So again, that's for social rent, affordable rent, rent to buy, and shared ownership. Between 2010 and 2021, it's worth pointing out that we didn't have the ability to grant fund social rent. It wasn't a policy priority for the government at the time. But since 2021, we've had the ability to fund social rent in certain areas of the country where affordability was deemed to be especially high. And since February 2023, we've had the ability to fund social rent across the whole of the country. And when I'm talking about the country, I should say England, because we are Homes England. So it's a bit of a sea change, really. And certainly for anyone who's joined a housing association development team in the last 10 years, they won't have actually probably delivered very much social rent. They won't have appraised for social rent schemes. So that's a bit of a change, and it's a bit of a change in mindset. So one of the things that Homes England is currently doing is any bids that we receive, we're asking all partners to appraise them for social rent from the outset. Doesn't necessarily mean that we will fund those homes. It may not be the right thing to do in a particular location, but we're absolutely expecting all partners to have demonstrated that they've considered social rent as part of their sort of armoury. We also have higher grant benchmarks to reflect the fact that obviously rents for social rent are lower. And so what that means is that housing associations, local authorities, community groups who are registered providers are actually not able to borrow as much funding as they might if they were able to charge higher rents. So our grant rates do reflect that. And we also have something called the Estate Regeneration Programme. I mentioned our remit had increased to include regeneration. And so where there is estate regeneration taking place and there is social rent stock that needs to be demolished, but which is also going to be replaced, in the past, we wouldn't have been able to fund that replacement housing. But to give you an example, I'm currently taking a bid through the assessment process. 144 social rent homes are going to be knocked down. They're going to be replaced with brand new social rent housing, and there are going to be other types of affordable housing delivered alongside market housing. And up until probably 2 months ago, we wouldn't have been able to fund those 144 replacement homes, but we're now able to do that. So social rent becoming much more of a priority for the organisation. If we just go on to the next slide. I thought it worth briefly sharing with you some examples of the types of developments where we have worked with church groups, where we've worked with housing associations, working with church groups, where church groups have been the catalyst for development, where churches have provided land, and where they've provided buildings to deliver new affordable housing. There's a range of examples ranging from 10 to 80 homes. They don't all have to be large developments. They don't have to be small developments. There's a range. There are community-led groups involved in delivering those new developments. Many are working in partnership with housing associations too. So this slide I've got here, many of you may be familiar with it. It's Keswick Community Land Trust. They worked with St John's Church in Keswick to make some land available at a price which was affordable to the Community Land Trust to enable them to deliver some new homes. And they delivered 5 homes for affordable rent and 5 for shared ownership. It's worth pointing out that they did have to become a registered provider to draw down that grant, because it's a legislative requirement if you're going to own social rent or affordable rent homes that you become a registered provider. If we just have the next slide. So this next example, and apologies, most of these are in the northwest. That's my area of experience, but there are lots of examples from across the country. This is Limelight in Trafford, where Trafford Housing Trust worked alongside the local church, which was sort of coming to the end of its useful life, and the rectory was also quite problematic. So brand new church was constructed as part of this development, and it sits alongside an 81 bed extra care scheme, which is for older people, and it also involved the relocation of GP surgeries, library, council services, nursery, and Homes England supported this scheme. So an example of church land being used, another example, and a new church being constructed as part of that. The next slide focuses very briefly on almshouses. Often, kind of have a religious foundation. There's the Almshouse Association, where there are over 100, I'm sure it's more, almshouses. Not all are developing, but those who are often developing at relative scale compared to the size of the organisation. And we've got an example here, Draper's Place in Shrewsbury, where 25 new apartments were constructed, which almost doubled the size of stock that the almshouse actually originally began with. And then the next slide, which we saw then, brilliant, that's great, is St Bernard's in Liverpool, and this is a conversion of a building. Many of you will probably be contemplating assets in your parish and kind of wondering what's the future for them. Certainly for St Bernard's in Liverpool, the Archdiocese in this instance gifted land to gosh, I just lost my slide for a second, to housing people, building communities. And then they worked alongside the local community who contributed their sweat equity to the scheme, and also worked with Onward Housing Association, who were able to bring additional resources to the development to build 16 homes for shared ownership. So that's just to give you a flavour of the kinds of developments that Homes England has funded. So we just move on to the next slide. So in terms of future direction for social housing, so direction of the Affordable Homes Programme, what we've got until 2026, or if you're a strategic partner, so same money but funded in a slightly different way, you've got until 2028. But basically all the money needs to be defrayed by March 2026. We don't currently know what's going to happen after March 26. What I can say is that there has been an affordable homes programme for the last 50 years. We know that we have a housing crisis, and we know that affordable housing is a huge priority for the government. So we are anticipating that whilst we haven't yet had any discussions with the Department for Levelling Up and with Treasury, that there will be discussions at some point. And as I said, it's affordable housing is a need, and it has been regardless of who has been in power. We will have a new government next year, and as a public servant, I'm sure you will understand I'm not in a position to speculate on that in this call today. But we expect that affordable housing is likely to remain a very high priority. In the past, the emphasis of the Affordable Homes Programme has changed. Kind of we've gone for we in 2011 we had the introduction of the Affordable Homes Programme, and there was no social rent. And then in 2015-18 we had the Affordable Housing Guarantees Programme. In 2016 there was no affordable rent, and it was all about shared ownership. We're now in the lucky position to be able to fund the widest possible range of tenures. So there may be a different emphasis depending on who the government is, but it's very likely, we hope, that there will be a future programme. And sort of certainly from the point of view of housing associations, councils, community groups, it will be much more helpful, if we can have that full range of tenures from the start of any programme. Social rent's been reintroduced halfway through. The estate regeneration programme has been established halfway through the current programme. So business plans that were written back in 2021 to accommodate the Affordable Homes Programme are having to be rewritten, and boards are having to be reappraised, if you like, of the wider range of options that are available to them. There are some partners who appraise their business plans entirely on affordable rent, and they're having to rethink that, which means they've not been as fleet as foot in terms of being able to necessarily respond to the fact that social rent is now back on the table for everybody. So it would be great to be able to have the widest range of tenures possible. We know that there's a continued background of cost of living, issues around building safety and sustainability, building to carbon zero. So those issues are not going to go away. And we know it's going to be really important to align delivery to the needs of place. So what does this mean for you on this call? You might be a member of a PCC, you might be a member of clergy, you might just be an interested person as part of a wider community group. When we do get that programme, assuming that it happens, we're going to need a programme to populate it. And as many people will know, development takes time. So just because we're halfway through the existing one doesn't mean actually it's not a good time to be starting to think about kind of whether there might be opportunities from 2026 onwards. Our strategic plan certainly welcomes community groups. It welcomes, small, medium enterprises into our programs. Not, there are certain parameters that might need to be filled. We could just move on to the next slide. Yeah, so we'll have to populate those bids. We would recommend that you speak to your local, if you have got ideas, that we speak to your local authority to understand what the local need is. It's great to come up with a scheme, but if there isn't the local need, or if it doesn't align, then often that can be quite challenging. It's really important that local authorities are on board with any proposals. We'd suggest talking to your local housing associations already operating in your areas to see what the challenges are, again, to confirm what those needs are. We suggest working with rural and community housing enablers, who often have a very good ear to the ground and understanding of how to get ideas off the page and into, into reality. We'd also suggest that you visit schemes that are already up and running and talk to people who've been there and done it before. There were 4 examples that I've just showed you, and there are many more across the country that if you're interested in finding out more, I'd be able to share contacts with, I'm sure. Establish what your assets are, what your land is, what your buildings are, the skills that your people have. Have you got chartered surveyors, planners, community engagement specialists in your congregations, in your wider community groups that you work with? And establish what your objectives are and what you want to achieve. Are you looking to own and manage? Are you looking to do a Keswick Community Land Trust? It is entirely possible. They've demonstrated that, but it is, it's for the long term. It's a long commitment. You need to become registered with the housing regulator. So, is that what you want? Or actually, are you looking to work in partnership with a registered provider? Are you looking to sell a long lease or asset? You'd need to grant a minimum of 125 years and up to 990 years. That can often be quite challenging concept, to transfer that ownership, but often that is what is required. And have a housing association, have a local authority manage those homes for you. And it's also very important to talk to the local authority about nominations as well. Looking at who is on the local waiting list. Unless you're a community land trust and you can define your own objects and your own geography and who it is who's going to live in your community, actually, if you're looking at delivering affordable housing, you will be working with some of the most vulnerable people in society who are on the local waiting list. So it's really important to understand what that process is as well. I think that's everything from me. My contact details are on the next slide. I think I'm just within my 10 minutes. I'll hand over to the next speaker.
Christine, thank you hugely. Great to have that wider overview of what's happening and the work of Home Homes England. So much, it seems, there to celebrate and to learn from. It'll be good then just to take that and to look into the work of the Church Housing Association. And Crystal Hicks is with us this evening. Crystal works across the housing and charitable sector. She has a background in customer experience and leadership. She's the chair of Women in Social Housing and CEO of a regeneration charity in the Northeast, as well as a board member of the Church Housing Association. Crystal, thank you so much for being part of this evening. We look forward to what you have to say.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I do have some slides, I think. It should be coming up on the screen. Thank you. Yeah, so thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be here. So as mentioned, I am a board member of Church Housing Association, and as was covered off in that introductory video, Church Housing Association has been set up in response to the Coming Home report, so one of the 3 entities that have been established to help realise the ambitions of the Coming Home report. So I am based in the northeast of England, and I've worked and lived across the country. I am a mother to twin girls, and I have a crazy Cocker Spaniel called Stephen. Feels like we're sharing dog stories tonight, so that's mine. So as mentioned, my background's in social housing and charity sector leadership. I wear a number of hats these days, including chair of Women in Social Housing. Women in Social Housing is an organisation that exists to create a sector within which everybody can flourish. So it's not just about creating a sector in which women can flourish, but creating a sector in which everybody can flourish. So we are a member organisation made up of professionals and organisations across the UK. I'm not going to talk much about my role for Wish, but if there are any questions that come up, I'm more than happy to answer those in the panel discussions that we have. What I am going to talk about, very briefly actually, is the Church Housing Association and where we're at on our journey, because I'm sure you're all quite keen to hear about this new housing association. So on the next slide, I'll just talk a little bit more about where we're at on our journey so far. So we're very new. We are in our early days of developing the Housing Association. So our first task has been to appoint our board of non-executive directors. To set up any housing association, you have to have a board of competent and well-experienced board members. And I'm very pleased with the company I keep on the board. We've managed to recruit an exceptional team of individuals who have an array of backgrounds in social housing, in development, in tenant experience, and everything you really need, I think, to be a strong social housing board. So the board is really diverse in terms of geography as well. So it's really important to us that we inspire action in our communities, and having a wide geographical spread of our board members is a key way that we are going to be able to do that. The board's also very passionate about social housing, and it's very difficult to set up a housing association from scratch. It takes passion and determination, and the board definitely have that. So to be a housing association, as has already been touched on slightly in the previous sort of presentation, you need to be registered with the regulator of social housing. And for anybody who's been through this process, you will know how arduous that is. It is very thorough, a very thorough process and a complex process to become registered with the regulator of social housing. And we were delighted to submit our application to the regulator in October. We await the outcome of that application, which is about a 6-month process with a fair wind, but that is step one done. So we are as close as we can be to becoming a registered provider of social housing. But we're pressing ahead whilst we wait for the outcome of our application, and we've developed our business plan, which essentially articulates, well, what is it that we're going to do? How are we going to deliver social housing? And that starts with 8 homes initially, which we are delivering in partnership with Bromford Housing, and they're going to talk a bit about that this evening. But our ambitions are obviously much greater than 8 homes, and we've got plans to develop and regenerate homes and land across the country in the coming years. So on the next slide, I've just very briefly outlined our value-based approach to housing. So I joined the board, about 6 months ago now. And one of the reasons I joined the board was because I've seen far too many examples of housing associations that maybe aren't values-led. And the one thing that the Coming Home Report is committed to is that this housing association will be values-led. So those 5 S's have been referenced already a number of times tonight, but as a housing association board, we are developing our model around how a housing association can be sustainable, safe, stable, social and satisfying in terms of delivering for our tenants. And I think this quote from the Coming Home Report itself really speaks to that. So we need more truly affordable homes and stronger communities that people can be proud of, where they feel safe and welcome and put down roots and flourish. So my background is in sort of managing housing management, neighbourhood management, and all too often that's been what's missing in communities and has led to tenancy failure. So I'm really excited about that values-based approach that we're taking. I think I can also speak quite candidly, maybe from my personal experience and background, around why we need to set up a housing association that's a bit different. So for any of you who are maybe not from a social housing background, here's a little bit of an insight into maybe what goes wrong or what gets in the way of being a truly values-based organisation. So the truth is that in the way that the sector is regulated or has been regulated in the past, there's been a real focus on economic viability. And that leads organisations, housing associations, to focus quite a lot on financial viability, but maybe not as much as we could be focusing on consumer standards and the experience of our tenants. I think you couple that with a lack of capacity for investment, and which leads to underinvestment in housing and regeneration in particular, and sometimes a lack of love and care for the tenants that housing associations serve. That can all sort of accumulate in a lack of quality social housing. So we aim to be different. We're not focusing on turnover or number of homes. What we're really focusing on is measuring really successful tenancies and how you create good quality homes and tenancies within which tenants can thrive. So we believe that this will create thriving communities where tenants have security and really flourish in the neighbourhood they belong to, without fear of tenancy failure constantly looming at the door. And the last thing that I just wanted to touch on is the role of the community worker. So this was referenced in Guli's opening talk to us. And on my final slide, I've just sort of summarised a little bit what we think the role of community worker is going to be. So in the Coming Home report, we talk quite a bit around how churches are already really active in our communities, but much of this work meets sort of urgent crisis. But the vision is really to shift the focus towards preventing homelessness and helping people to secure housing around those 5 S's. And the role of the community worker is going to be key to that. So we're looking at Church Housing Association about this role being really locally based. So where we have a good concentration of homes, having a locally based community worker who can help prevent tenancy failure as opposed to just responding to crisis when it occurs, who can be part of the community, who can work in partnership with others, and who can meet local needs. So this is really where I think we're going to have a bit of a USP, focusing on prevention, restoration and stability for the people and communities we'll be serving, and moving away from crisis to building something that is lasting and meets the needs of each individual community. So we haven't defined exactly what this will look like yet, and I assume it will look very different in each community depending on the existing community infrastructure in place. So we really want to be working in partnership with others. We're not in the business of duplicating, so we're really keen to tap into the local voluntary sector, local church connections, to understand how this work can best contribute towards meeting the community and housing needs through our values-based approach. So I hope that's giving you a bit of an insight into Church Housing Association, and I'm more than happy to take obviously questions in the panel discussion as well on what we're doing. Thank you.
Crystal, thank you hugely for that. And I love the way that we're kind of building up layers with Bishop Guli giving some solid foundations to why we came in, and then Homes England, that bigger picture, and now down to the Church Housing Association, and we'll pick up on that. And I'm really pleased to kind of cement that. We have Robert Nettleton from Bromford Housing Association. Robert's been Chief Executive of Bromford for the past 5 years. He's worked in housing and community regeneration for the past 20 years. For me, in this neck of the woods, we're coming back down to Gloucestershire because Bromford is based in Tewkesbury. I'm particularly pleased to be working with Robert and always learn so much from speaking with him. Bromford owns 47 homes, largely between Bristol and Lichfield, and it's a great partnership. And Robert, thank you for being with us, and we look forward to what you will add to this growing conversation.
Well, thank you very much, Bishop Robert, and very nice to be here this evening just to say a few words. I probably going to split my sort of talk into a few stages. The first, very briefly on Bromford. Secondly, the part that I think why Bromford and working with the church diocese I think is complementary. And then thirdly, maybe also, if I may, just perhaps set out one or two things where I think we could do even more together. So Bromford is a housing association, not-for-profit housing association. We own 47,000 homes, and we've got a pretty strong balance sheet. Just to put this into the sort of the public space, if we were a public company, we would be bordering on FTSE 100, so quite a sizable organisation. The strong balance sheet is really important, but what we're about ultimately is the people. And what we say here at Bromford is that we're here to provide homes for those people who can't access market housing. For those of us, whether on this call tonight, that can afford to access market housing, and by that I mean either buy your own home or even rent your own home, that's absolutely fine, and people should go and do that. We're not here to provide homes for those people. We're here to provide homes for those people who can't access market housing. And yes, a little as Crystal's just said, it's vitally important that we provide homes that are warm, safe and secure. But what we're really interested in is the people that live in those homes. And we care for those people who live in those homes, which is not too dissimilar to a number of other organisations like us. But we try and go a bit further. And ultimately, we want every single person in our homes to thrive. And when you bring all that together, the whole purpose of Bromford is to invest in homes and relationships so people can thrive. And I think, therefore, that what our purpose and the purpose, the mission of the diocese and the new church HA has got a number of overlaps here. And what I thought I'd do was perhaps just set out a couple of ideas as to why I think working in partnership can be complementary. So first of all, as both Bishop Guli and as Crystal touched on, the church has this aspiration, which I think is absolutely fantastic, to employ community workers or neighbourhood champions. To give you some idea, at Bromford, we employ 250 neighbourhood coaches. Every single one of those neighbourhood coaches looks after or oversees about 175 homes. And the reason why we employ so many full-time people in our neighbourhood coaching approach is because we want every single one of our customers, our tenants, to thrive. And we started this role about 4 to 5 years ago. And what we did was to move from a reactive interaction with our customers to a proactive one. And we concluded that if we genuinely wanted every single one of our customers to thrive, we needed to get to know pretty much every single one of our customers and then understand what the next stage is on their journey. And I'll perhaps just finish my quick intro here with an example of that. I think the second point then, and we heard again from Bishop Guli and then also from Christine and Crystal, around the different elements of affordable housing. And what we have done over quite a few years is to really focus on building as many homes for social rent as we can. And indeed, we've built more homes for social rent than any other housing association in England over the last 3 years. And why have we done that? Because 2019, we did a lot of research and we identified that if we built homes for social rent, people had a much greater chance of actually staying in those homes. But also, actually, we had a greater chance of trying to reduce homelessness in the areas in which we work. So wherever we can, we continue to build homes for social rent, and whether that's working with Homes England, who we work with closely, or whether that's working with a number of other developer partners, where we can, we'll build homes for social rent. I think, therefore, that whether it's neighbourhood coaches from our point of view, or whether it's community workers or neighbourhood champions, I think there's some real overlap there. And I think there's also overlap in terms of building homes for social rent. We will continue to work closely with the diocese in terms of providing homes at Innsworth in Gloucester. We have around, we're building about 350 homes, affordable homes on that site with Taylor Wimpey, and we will continue to work closely on that with the Church Housing Association. But I think, if I may, just a couple of things is, can we do more together? Because, as I think Bishop Guli set out very, very eloquently at the beginning, the need for affordable housing, the need particularly for social housing, has never been greater in my view. Here's just a couple of examples there where I think we can work even better in the medium term. One, I think, is, back to Crystal's point, we shouldn't be duplicating the work of neighbourhood champions or community workers and neighbourhood coaches. We should be working together in the communities in which we own homes. And the second point that I would raise would be in terms of how do we build more homes. We, for example, have our own construction company. Going back to Christine's presentation, we're a strategic partner. We've currently got Homes England funding of over £200 million that we can invest in schemes. And we do, but the church has even more land. And how can we therefore work together to bring more of that land forward, to build more affordable and social homes, which either the church or ourselves can then own and manage going forward. I'm always very conscious on these kind of presentations that I can talk quite a bit about facts and figures. What I think is hugely important is that what really matters is the people, are our customers. And perhaps just to give you one quick example, every single month I go out with our colleagues who work out there on the front line. It could be our maintenance engineers or our neighbourhood coaches or our support workers. And one of the ones that I've done recently that sticks very much in my mind is I was out with one of our neighbourhood coaches in Cirencester, and we'd visited 4 or 5 different of our customers that day to understand what the next stage on their journey was and how we could help. And we went to one lady's house, and this lady had secured employment for 16 hours a week. Now, for some of us, including me on the call, that may not sound too great. But the really powerful thing was that only 18 months before, that lady had so much anxiety she couldn't even leave her front door. But the work of our neighbourhood coaches, working in partnership with a whole series of other organisations, had enabled that lady not only to leave her front door, but actually to secure work. An enormous transition in her journey. Now, that journey is, I could give many examples of that, but what makes this one really special is that lady hadn't worked for 16 years. And she also had a 14-year-old daughter. So this was the first time her 14-year-old daughter had seen her mother work during her lifetime. And therefore, the impact not only that it had on the mother in the house, but also on the daughter was life-changing. And all of that comes back to what we try and do here at Bromford, which is to enable people to thrive. And with that, I'll pass back to you, Bishop Robert. Robert,
thank you hugely, and what a great place to lead us to as we go into some discussion in groups. You've reminded me, I didn't know it, about kind of why I always enjoy our conversations, and that's reflected in Guli's presentation, in all we've heard from Christine and Crystal, and I just heard it so eloquently there from you, Robert, as the CEO of a major organisation, but actually coming back to that individual and what we are doing here in this work in housing is literally saving people's lives, is rebuilding people's lives. It's allowing people to find life and it's an overused word, but to flourish in life and to make those steps. And it's not just for them, it's for their children as well. This is why the work that we're engaged in here and the work that you do is so crucial indeed, and so moving to have time to reflect on that. And it's good to see that there are similar stories. It's good to see that there are things being shared in the chat already. We are going to have 10 to 15 minutes for some conversation now, but I'm going to come to Chris, who is going to set us our homework. Chris, you've been involved in the setting together. I'm sure you've enjoyed listening to that as much as I have. We're going to go into groups. Give us a couple of pointers for where we might at least start our conversation in those groups.
Okay, I mean, it's been fantastic inputs, really grateful for them. Raised all kinds of issues, but for me, it would be really helpful to hear what the groups think are the key issues from what we've heard being talked about so far tonight. And secondly, given the fact that there are so many things that need doing, we've talked about sustainability, retrofit, values, partnerships, homelessness, church land, asylum seeker housing. These have all come up in the chat so far. What ought the church's priorities to be? I think is a key question, because we can't do everything all at once. And advice from the groups would be really valuable.
So I hope you had some good conversations in the groups. The way in which we are going to do this is via the medium of the chat. So please do put questions or comments into that. Chris Beals, who's working with me, is going to be keeping a close eye on that. And Chris, I'll be coming to you as we go through to pick up on some questions. If your question is for a particular member of our panel, do please put their name in the chat so we know where to start that bit of conversation, but others will no doubt comment as well. While that's happening, I'm going to start with something that we've been reflecting on in the group that I've been part of. This is purely random. Robert, let me come to you. How do we, by we, and by we I mean we as a nation, how do we avoid short-termism for what is a long-term challenge?
Yeah, it's not the smallest of questions to ask, is it, Robert? Really, it's. I think we've got to get to a point, a bit like what Bishop Guli said in her intro video, which is about how do we get some kind of at government level, how do we get cross-party working to understand that actually, as we would all know, building houses cannot be done overnight. It takes a period of time from the inception through planning to then building them, and then people living in them. But I think we would all, I very much hope that we would all agree that for everyone to have a home, that just enables them to build or rebuild their lives. And sometimes I think that UK PLC can get so fixated on pounds, shilling and pence that actually if we have places that everybody can call home, somewhere that's in a safe, secure place, then actually UK PLC will benefit from this over a period of time. And I do think that sometimes organisations, of course, we all have to some degree, make sure that the pounds and pence do stack up. But ultimately, what is the purpose? And what is the purpose of key organisations, whether it's housing associations, funding agencies, wider government or whatever else? Yes, funding capital is important. But ultimately, isn't this about how do we make sure that everybody can have a home and can build or rebuild their lives? So I think we've got to start with both lobbying government and different political parties, but then locally, how do organisations work together such that we're not, and we all see this, but we're not simply trying to get the last pound out of a piece of land. What is the real thing that we're trying to achieve here? And I believe the real thing we're trying to achieve here is provide homes so people can build and rebuild their lives.
Robert, thank you. And a really good question there about what's best value. That would start another whole conversation around that. Christine, I know from Homes England, you're a public body. You don't want to stray into party politics, but I want to know your reflections on how on that and how we avoid that short-termism.
Well, I guess I would say it takes time to bring housing development forward. You know, you might have to go out and acquire the land, or you might have the land, but you've got to come up with a plan for it. You've got to get planning on it. You've got to tender that scheme. You've got to appoint a contractor to build it. That's got to be overseen. You've got to come up with your management plan to kind of manage those homes. So you know, it's a long-term commitment. And whilst we've got our strategy from 2023 to 2028, the Affordable Homes Programme, kind of comes to its current funding conclusion at the end of 2026. I guess it's sort of in the background, kind of not to be sort of driven by those timescales, but to constantly be progressing and thinking of almost working up the opportunity to take advantage of kind of the funding opportunity when it becomes clear sort of what that is. And I suppose reflecting on the fact that even though we've had so many different programs and different governments, we have actually had an affordable housing program for 50 years. So that does provide a sort of continuity of funding, even though there are subtleties and nuances within that change. So it's recognition that if we might be talking about or starting to think about a site now, in all likelihood it's not going to actually come forward for development for 3 or 4 years. So it's sort of thinking in the long term, I think.
So that culture that
despite
says,
the kind of political sort of changes in the background.
So that culture that says it's a given, and Crystal from the Church Housing Association, I suspect you would say to me that kind of newly coming into the market, this is exactly what we're about.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I suppose my experience is that if you're invested in your community, then you've got a long-term outlook. So the difference I think that we're trying to achieve with Church Housing Association is getting back to being really community focused. So it's not just housing, but it's enabling thriving and flourishing communities. So if you've got that, like Robert said, from Bromford's approach, if you really invested in your communities, you will not be short term in your thinking. So yeah, that's all I would really add to that. It's very easy to buy up land and develop land, maybe not so much for social housing, but in terms of property development, if you're not invested, because you can just flip it and move on. Whereas it's very different for values-driven housing association.
Crystal, thank you. And certainly for me as a bishop engaged in this, it's that sense of building community is fundamental to who we're called to be as a church, and for the Church of England looking out for the whole of the nation in that. Lots of fantastic stuff coming into the chat. Chris, what's particularly struck you there? Where next?
Right, it's really interesting to see some of the comments about risk. Who takes the risk? Who's going to carry the risk? And one or two people have commented that dioceses are quite nervous sometimes and haven't bought into the coming home vision, if you like. That doesn't mean to say that they won't, but this whole question of who takes the risk and have we got the capacity and how can we move forward? And then linked to that are, somebody has said, it's Nikki Morgan has said, we've got some land. How do we move forward practically? We want to do something. This is a local parish. I know it's in Loughborough. It's a great site. And actually getting on with it, I think, is the next big challenge. And somebody also says, and there's so much legal kind of rubbish that you have to get through with the church to be able to get anywhere. So that whole question of risk and progression.
Risk and possession. So, which of our esteemed panel would like to go first on risk and progression? Crystal, let me come to you. That seems very appropriate.
I mean, I suppose in their wisdom, this is why the entities have been set up in response to the Coming Home report. So, like Bishop Guli referred to the foundation itself as the charity who's sort of taken on the mission to deliver on this ambition, and the development agency is there to support with the development of land and assets. So not necessarily always going to be the people who carry the risk. We can definitely help unlock the potential when there's land there. And again, Church Housing Association, I referenced the regulation and how you become sort of registered as a registered provider, but the whole reason that is arduous is because it's meant to protect against risks. So again, Church Housing Association, I suppose that's one of the reasons there why we've been set up to enable some of that risk to be managed well. But we won't do it all. There'll be a lot of, and there is already masses of amazing work going on in housing development on church sites and within the church that we don't have any involvement with. But there's definitely a corporate structure there to be able to help with some of this.
Thank you. And I think that's the great thing about what's happening there, which is about providing those structures to manage the risk. I might come back to diocese and risk in a moment, but Christine, do you want to say something maybe about risk?
On risk, kind of one of the ways that you can de-risk is to work in partnership with a housing association. I think sometimes people do think of housing associations, and for some of the reasons that Crystal said, not necessarily values driven, very commercial in their approach, and some housing associations are like that, but many aren't. And if you call them up and you ask to speak to someone in their development team, you may just find that they're able to share some information, to share some local intelligence about kind of what the issues are in that neighbourhood. They may have, Robert's mentioned the huge amount of investment that Bromford are making in affordable housing. They have retained professionals who work with them, architects, surveyors, employers agents, and it may well be that some of their partners are able to offer some pro bono advice. That won't be possible in all instances. I'm not opening up Robert's development team to do that, but often that's a good foot in the door. That means you're not spending out on abortive plans. You can get a sense of what might be possible for fairly sort of small investment, kind of in terms of time, not financially. And just in terms of Homes England de-risking, ultimately, when we put funding into something, we want it to get built. We're not in the business of handing money back. We really don't want to do that, and in actual fact the government doesn't want us to do that. So we really want to work with partners ultimately to get homes built, and often sometimes partners might try something. They might try, for example, to build social to build shared ownership. They find there isn't a market. Once they've demonstrated there isn't a market, actually we say, well, okay, let's convert that, let's do that as rent to buy, let's do it as affordable rent. There are we don't just sort of pull the rug out from individuals kind of when they've got an allocation. We work with them. We understand their issues around planning risk, for example, and we try and work with partners to get the ultimate outcome, which is homes for people. I don't like talking about outputs, but homes for people is really what we all want to see.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. Anything that you want to add to that?
Just a couple of things, Robert. I've just noted on the chat that we've got both Paul, chair of Sovereign Network, and earlier Michael, I know, was on from Broadland, and ourselves, 3 housing associations. I think between us and other housing associations that are out there, we have considerable skills. I agree fully with Christine in terms of taking some of that early risk. I think what's really important for the church is to be really clear on what they're seeking to achieve, what you're seeking to achieve, and then actually work out, well, how do you achieve it, and what can partners do? So whether it's the 3 of us, 3 housing associations that I've seen on this call, we've got our own construction company, as Crystal said, we can do all the upfront work, but we need to understand what we're all seeking to achieve, what we're seeking to achieve. Likewise, I have absolutely no doubts that in the years to come, the Church Housing Association will build the capacity and capability to do this on behalf of others. But I think it's just about, over the coming months and years, how do you keep working with others to make sure houses continue to get built? But I think there's all the capability out there in other housing associations to totally de-risk whatever kind of sites you've got.
Thank you, Robert. And as a bishop engaged in this, I absolutely hear that frustration about some dioceses being engaged, others finding it more difficult to do so. And I think that sense of that sense of anxiety which is there. But if our Christian faith tells us anything about the nature of our God, who does not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but empties himself, there is that sense about taking a risk, being aware, of course, of all the frameworks and things, but taking that risk and being involved. And making our home amongst the people of our communities. And strangely enough, it is in doing that that we find, as we bless others, God actually blesses a church which is doing what a church is called to be. So I think we need to be a bit bolder and a bit more courageous in doing that, which I'm sure Chris would agree with me. And Chris, where next?
Right. I think there are three things that have been striking me. One is a point about using closed churches, because we've got loads and loads of churches which are either closed or in danger of being closed. And that example that Christine gave from the Archdiocese of Liverpool is very interesting. Second thing is, coming up with a number of people, is the whole question of temporary housing and the plight of asylum seekers and refugees in particular. Also, Ivy, who does fantastic work with the Gypsy Roma traveller community, has raised the question of where do the most marginalized people in our country actually fit in. And then the third thing that struck me was the whole question of how do we add value? Paul Massara's point from Sovereign Housing Association. What is it the church can bring that will really add value?
Let's start with the last of those, and it may be that people want to pick up on the others within that, and very much that really important thing about those on the margins, those otherwise excluded, and perhaps in thinking about this question about the church. Crystal, can I come to you? Where does the church add value? Come and challenge us. I think ask the church ask us some difficult questions.
I think this is sometimes a bit of a circular question, because one of the reasons I joined Church Housing Association was because I was a Christian working in housing, and people were constantly asking me, Crystal, how can the church solve the housing crisis? But I think what that shows is that actually there's a real desire within local churches, within local parishes and dioceses, to do something about housing. And my experience is, what I often see is that churches and Christians in their local communities do a lot of the crisis response. So it's people who are finding themselves in crisis, financial crisis, mental health, family crisis, and through the goodwill of the church, there's support there for those people. I suppose where the church adds value in this mission that we're on is to helping with the prevention of those things in the first place, with the prevention of the tenancy failures. And with that we need housing, and for housing we need land, and we need support from the local churches, the local parishes, to actually build and come and be a presence in your community. So as Guli referenced, communities where we own 100 homes, that's a big substantial presence. It requires planning permission, it requires full backing of the community to do that development. So that would be my challenge. How can churches sort of shift their perspective from a lot of energy into crisis and support crisis and more into prevention?
Crystal, it's just one of the questions I've just seen in the chat here, which talks about the good work that the Archdiocese did and the Roman Catholic Church has done in making that land available. And it says, why can the Church of England do that?
Okay, I'm not a development expert, and I know there's maybe some as I've learned over the last 6 months, there's maybe some covenant issues on land that we may need to overcome to enable us to realise our ambitions. But we need to get, as you say, we need to get brave and bold on that. Yeah.
And certainly our experience in the Diocese of Gloucester, we have a similar a church site and a rectory site. The church is actually still standing, but the rectory has been demolished, very substantial garden and lands around, and a significant social housing the development that's taken place on that. Christine, come and ask the Church of England some awkward questions.
Well, I first just wanted to respond to Ivy and say, yes, we do fund provision, new traveller, gypsy and traveller pitches. through the Affordable Homes Programme, it can be very challenging, and finding land. So here's a challenge then. Finding land for, you know, we've referenced people who often don't necessarily want homes in their backyard, trying to find accommodation, trying to find land for gypsies and travellers, be that permanent sites or permanent transit sites, is often hugely challenging. And the sites that come to us, we've actually got a bid in at the moment for a scheme in the north of England, where the site is actually only going to be usable potentially for a period of a certain period of months during the year because of flood risk for the rest of the year, and that is the site that they can come up with. Actually, it fits really nicely for the traveller community in that area, and they want to see that site developed. But you know, it speaks of kind of where these sites are often found under, you know, you can see them by railway cuttings, under motorways, you know, kind of, you know, on the very edges of society. So that would be my challenge. Can you find, you know, kind of as part of what you're doing, you know, and it's very early days for the Housing Association in particular, but, you know, as part of that, what would the wider remit, kind of once you've got yourself up and established, what would the wider remit be? And can the church find land specifically for marginalised groups, like gypsies and travellers?
Thank you, Christine. And I think right across this, there is a challenge to the church about finding the land, but arguing the case within our parishes and communities for that importance of housing and a decent house for all. And that means that actually we have to share the land. And we have to live with our neighbours, and there's a very good question about who is our neighbour in that really challenges us. Robert, you were quite good at the end of your talk in challenging a bit about the church. We're coming very close to the end of this time. Anything else you want to add on just challenging the churches from this?
I think I'm probably just repeating partly what I said earlier, but I think the church has just enormous opportunity to do more. So I think we've talked about land over the last 10 minutes or so. I think the other thing that I would just say on land, and we find this quite a lot, is that actually when you then speak to local people, actually the vast majority of local people are actually quite comfortable with new homes being built, particularly when you start to talk about, well, how it affects their families. So it could be, well, what about their children or their grandparents in terms of getting some of these homes in the village in which we want them to stay. So I do think, if I could, it's sort of my one plea would be, could we go faster in terms of identifying land and then working with housing associations, with the church HA or whatever else, in terms of trying to move some of this forward, because we know that the need is so enormous. And I do think then that there is a huge opportunity to work with community workers, neighbourhood champions, for us neighbourhood coaches, for other housing association colleagues on this call, it may be housing officers or other names for colleagues. But I think that working together in communities is hugely important. And I think in some of the areas in which we work, and this is probably our fault, we are still working slightly in silos, when actually if we can work together, we can achieve much more together.
Thank you, Robert. And I think that power of connection, which we see a bit on this call this evening, is deeply significant. Chris, you've worked so hard, and I do know to say a huge thank you to you, along with Christine and Crystal and Robert and Bishop Guli in her absence, for your contributions tonight. Really grateful for the wisdom and the insights you've shared with us. Chris, you've listened to all of this. I just wonder what your final thought is as we come towards the end of our time together.
One thing I'd observe is that Nikki Morgan put in a question about how can we develop something practical on our land, and there's been loads of responses to that, of people offering help and the conversation going on as we've been talking, which is wonderful. I love the idea that Sovereign Network have got £100 million funds, so let's have a look at that. It's in the chat. Thank you very much, Paul. We haven't touched on sustainability, which was one of the very first points that was raised actually by Ruth Gregory of Houch, who's a great friend of ours. And I think that whole question of how to create sustainable new homes and retrofit existing homes is going to loom large in our thinking in the coming months. So I think we've got a huge challenge. And Andrea Titterington said, let's create a forum. Let's find ways of getting people to keep these conversations going at local and regional and national levels, because there's so much momentum here. And I'm really, really grateful for the inspiration that we've had tonight.
Chris, thank you, and again, thank you, Crystal and Christine and Robert, for your contributions. It has sparked an extraordinarily lively conversation, and looking at the chat, I think we could be here for a very long time. Indeed, I'm not sure you totally thank me for that this evening. It clearly is a vital contribution to the future of our society and the values by which we live and how we treat our fellow citizens in this nation and indeed beyond. We have trodden on some really significant, dare I say, even holy ground, and we do so at this season of the year when we turn our eyes towards a young boy born in a stable who then makes an earthly home in Nazareth. And for Christians, that sense of God coming to dwell with us. A literal translation of that is God coming and pitching his tent in the soil of our earth. I always love that sense of the tent pegs going into the soil. And that sense of the foundation of the homes that we build. It reminds us of the importance of that. And a call to the church to be risk-taking and to be prophetic in this area. And it's been great to share this time with you. So as we come to the end of our time, we remember that common cause that we share with all people to build community, houses and homes that build community. And I want to say a huge thank you for all of you being here this evening. The chat will be available, and there's a lot more in there to pick up on. And Chris, I'm sure we'll think about how we pick up on this conversation in new ways. So thank you, and I wish you all a very pleasant rest of this evening. Christine, Crystal, Robert, thank you.